Yo, have you heard about Anchor? It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome, everyone, to the L7C podcast. Today, we have a very special episode for you all. Today, we have the return of the queen of the L7C, Dr. Chelsea Police. How are you doing today, ma'am?
I am doing well. Happy to be back. It's been a while.
It has been a while. I think the last time we spoke, Megan Rapinoe and Draymond Green were about to fight.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So just for all your fans out there in the United States and across the world, what's been up, where you been, and what's going on?
Yeah, so as you know, I graduated with my PhD in May, and then that's when things got a little bit crazy. So was on the job market during that time and was interviewing, doing all that stuff, finally got an offer. And so I had to pack up and move my life within a 3-week period of time. So that's kind of what's been going on. Moved from Louisville to Oxford, Ohio, and then started a new job, which has been incredible, but it's also been crazy, crazy, crazy. We're getting ready to wrap up the semester in a couple of weeks. It's absolutely flown by, but it's been an incredible experience. I love it so, so much. But I'm definitely happy to be back now that I'm a little bit more settled and have some additional free time to come back and talk to everyone.
So what's it like being now a full-time professor? What's the differences from what you obviously, you were having homework and dissertations and all that stuff, but was the transition smooth from what you were doing to graduate to now just being full time? You're not doing homework, you're grading homework. How is that transition?
It's been crazy. It's been interesting to say the least. So I went from teaching 2 classes to now I'm teaching 4 classes, which is just insanity. I teach more than 10 hours a week, 4 days a week. So just really, really hectic, but my students are incredible. And I just really, really like the campus and where I am in the department I'm in. So that transition is crazy, but it's been phenomenal. And I can't see myself anywhere else as of right now where I am in my life. And it's just been really great. I have so many good things to say. It's really hard to put into words.
Since you had to pack up and basically leave in a 3 weeks, month's time, I know some companies, when you have to move, they'll try and help, alleviate some costs or pay you a little bit more. Do universities do that, or were you just SOL and trying to find a place, all that within 3 weeks?
So they do give some moving expenses, and it really depends on the university. So, some will offer more than others. It just really, really depends. So I did get a little bit of help, and my colleagues in the department were more than willing to recommend realtors and different people to talk to, give me kind of a lay of the land and what to expect in and out of Oxford. So it made things a lot easier. And let me tell you, we bought a house in a 2-week period of time, which was absolutely insane. Would I do it again? Probably not. But, we had to do what we had to do, and it ended up working out really, really well.
So are you the newest professor on your guys' staff, or did other people come as well?
Yeah, so I am one of 2 new hires this year. My position is a permanent position, and then the other hire is what's called a visiting assistant professor. And so that role is like a 5-year maximum, whereas mine is permanent. So as long as I want to stay in the role and I'm doing a good job, my position won't be eliminated and or somebody else won't have to fill it after that 5-year period.
So earlier you talked about like the classes you're teaching and the hours and all that. And since you were new, do they pick the classes you're teaching, or do you get to be the professor of the stuff that you are like an expert in? How does that work?
Yeah, so I did not get to pick what classes I wanted to teach this semester, actually, or next semester either, simply because they needed to fill whatever classes they needed. So the person that I basically took their position, they were a visiting assistant, and then they got a permanent line. That's what we call jobs, our lines. And so whatever that person was teaching prior is what I ended up teaching this semester. So I'm teaching a sport marketing class, and I'm teaching facilities and event management in sport, 2 classes I've never taught before. And I'll be teaching both of those next semester, along with a sport econ class, which the econ class I'm actually really excited about. I have an econ minor while I was an undergrad student. So it's something that I have interest in, and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, this semester didn't get to choose, next semester didn't get to choose, but hopefully next semester I'll have a little bit more say in what I teach. The nice thing is I have say in what time I teach, which is unusual. Yeah, so I don't have to teach, super early if I don't want to, and I don't have to teach super late in the afternoon if I don't want to. So that's kind of nice, and I think that's something that's a little bit unique to universities, because a lot of times the schedule is the schedule and you don't have a lot of say, especially with time.
So you said there are some classes that you're teaching that you've never taught before. So like in a normal job, like when someone comes on, they might have some shadowing to see like how to do something. So with those classes, how do you prepare? Like, do you talk to a colleague who's taught it before, or do they just say, here's a class, make a lesson plan and go?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. And, I've taken a sport marketing class and I've taken a facilities class as well. So I have a little bit of knowledge, but really, it's about using textbooks, using the internet, see what resources you can find, talking to people who have taught the classes in the past. And my department's been really good about the transition and helping me out, like giving me past syllabi, talking about past textbooks that they've used and things like that. So it really was incredibly helpful, but it's also really challenging. So I hate, relying on the textbook when I'm teaching, but this semester I'm certainly relying on it a lot more than I normally would, simply because, I'm learning some of the material along with my students. And so it's better to be accurate about what you're saying than trying to, kind of fake your way through it. And so for this semester especially, it's really been a learning experience for me, and that's kind of the nice thing about teaching some of the same things in the following semester is you can make changes and you can adapt and make things a lot better as you go. And that's really kind of the art of teaching is being able to make those adjustments, understanding what worked, what didn't, and then being able to adapt so that your students are getting the most out of the material and what they need to learn without, boring them to death with just, lecture material, because I don't like to do that. I like to bring activities and different things into the fold as well.
You get to decide your own like office hours as well.
Yep.
That's not bad. Well, it sounds like school and first year full-time professoring is going really well. So we hope that continue on. Do they automatically put you on like a tenure track, or how does that go?
So my position is not a traditional tenure track line. So I'm in a teaching position. So I don't have to do research in my role, whereas tenure track faculty have to teach and do research. But I still have an opportunity to promote within my own position. So right now, my official title is assistant teaching professor. And so I can still promote to the associate and to full professor over time, similar to a tenure track position, but it doesn't have the same kind of evaluation or benchmarks that a tenure track does. But I still have some of that job security in getting to promote and like contracts and things like that. So it's tenure track without being traditionally tenure track, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Fair enough. Fair enough. So since it's been a while, there's just been a whole bunch of things that have happened on the planet in regards to women in sports, just everything under the moon and sun. So with this one being your first one back in a minute, I just think we're just going to let you go and say what you want to say about what's been going on, and then we'll just go from there.
Yeah, I think the first thing that really pops into my mind is what's been going on in the NWSL. It's been a dumpster fire, for lack of a better term. They, are having record viewership numbers, but there's a massive problem from a culture perspective. So 9 out of the 10 teams as of this past weekend have had coaching changes. Many of the men who are in the league have been fired and or resigned due to allegations of abuse in different capacities. So verbal, even sexual, just really awful things. And more as these stories are coming out, it's becoming really, really clear that there are people inside the NWSL who knew about these allegations. So, for example, Paul Riley was with the Portland Thorns, and this is when he was accused of sexual coercion with some of his players, verbal abuse, things like that. There was an investigation. He was let go at Portland and then became the coach of the North Carolina Courage, where these allegations then came to light due to some journalists brought it to light. Some of the former players who made the allegations talked with these journalists, and it came to light. And it was found out that the investigation had happened, and somehow was let go of his job with Portland Thorns and somehow got a job with the North Carolina Courage. So
that doesn't make sense, but all right.
Yeah. Ultimately they let him go at North Carolina Courage. And that kind of created this reckoning of, who knew when, how did he have a job still, what's going on in the NWSL. And, another coach, Burke, who was with the Washington Spirit, verbal abuse, racist allegations, things like that, also was forced to resign. Massive mess going on there. The most recent allegations just came out past weekend with the Chicago Red Stars. Allegations against their coach were brought forth as early as 2014 and most recently in 2018. The crazy thing about this is they were just in the NWSL championship, and the Red Stars created their press release for 1 a.m. on Sunday morning. So they released this information about the coach resigning following the NWSL championship. Later found out that there was a Washington Post article coming out about these allegations. So they let him save face and get out of the organization. So the NWSL is just in a position, they're at a crossroads. Let's just put it that way. They have to figure out how they're going to protect their players, how they're going to implement things so that players don't face verbal, emotional, sexual abuse in their roles as professional athletes. And it's been a wild experience this year. And like I said, 9 out of 10 teams are facing coaching changes. Coaches in the past have been problematic and still hired. And we see this a lot with male coaches. It's what I call failing upward, right? So they get fired somewhere else. There's something problematic with them, and yet they still land on their feet. And that's just not something that happens with women historically. And so this is just something that's been weighing on me in terms of this organization. Love soccer, love women's soccer, but they really need to figure out what they're going to do moving forward and how they're going to address this so that this doesn't continue to happen, because it's not just one team, it's multiple teams that are experiencing this. And so we've got to protect players. That's it. At the end of the day, you've got to protect your players. They are the foundation of the league. And without them, you don't have a league. And we need professional soccer. We need women's soccer. And it's just been a crazy 10 months, I guess.
So, okay, so break down so you said the 9 out of the 10 head coaches. So just going from the coaches upward. So above the coach, we're talking the owners of the team, right?
Yes.
Okay. So then you go from the owners of the team to what? Who's above them besides like the commissioner, whoever's in charge, and
who's below them or above them?
Who's above the owners? Like who's running the league? Like the top person, and who's the top boss of?
So they have a commissioner, and their commissioner through most of 2021 resigned after the news of Paul Riley's transgressions came out. It was made very clear that the league knew about this and didn't do anything or didn't do anything to make sure that he did not get another job after the situation. And, Alex Morgan was actually a big part of this. She encouraged her teammate to speak up about this, tell her story. And, the commissioner came out and was like, we're really sorry. We didn't know. Why didn't we do more? We would have done more. Well, Alex Morgan had receipts of this other player telling the league about what was going on, what happened. And so the commissioner then resigned. And so they now have an interim CEO for the NWSL. So I don't know if that person's going to stay in that role through next year or if they're going to find somebody else. But their league structure is very interesting because U.S. Soccer actually pays salaries for some of the players, namely the national team players. Mm-hmm. And so it's a very weird dynamic and not traditional for what we see with professional organizations, simply because U.S. Soccer is kind of subsidizing the league to some extent. They aren't doing that as much as they have in the past. And the NWSL is really trying to become profitable so that they can get out from under U.S. Soccer. And in some respects, that makes sense. You want to be a standalone league. You want to show that you're profitable, that you can be a league on its own. But also, those national team players are getting paid a lot more than your non-national team players. And it's going to be really hard for teams to sustain that without the help of U.S. Soccer. So there's definitely some nuances with this particular professional league that we don't see with others.
So I guess, and obviously help me out here, because I'm trying to figure out how the best way to go about it, like going forward, would be. And if they have one, I don't know. Is there a task force in place where if something were to happen, they're not for or against the team or anyone? They're like there to get the truth. That's all they're supposed to do. Is there a task force in place? And if not, maybe that's something that I know you just said about the money that they need to invest some money in, because me personally, I really don't like it that you have to go to a reporter for like stuff or tweet to get traction. Like if you're a big organization like that with nationally known athletes, you should have your own tasks. Like there should be a task force where if Alex Morgan, she encouraged her teammate, go to whoever the chief officer is and have people investigate it. They'll come out that way. Like there should be people that are doing the investigations. That's just from a business organizational perspective. What do you think on that?
Yeah. So after the Paul Riley situation, the league, U.S. Soccer, and an outside maybe attorney's office or law firm said they were going to do an independent investigation into the league, figure out how this all happened. But with the most recent situation with the Chicago Red Stars, evidently Kristen Press, another big name national team player, raised concerns about, her abuse from the head coach to U.S. Soccer. And U.S. Soccer said that it was fine, it was nothing, and not to worry about it. So,
Okay.
so it's not just an NWSL issue, it's a US soccer issue now. It's an issue that, how far down does this go? If our professional athletes are experiencing this, what's happening at the club or the grassroots level? And those are under US soccer. So what does that look like? And there have been calls for investigations, not just at the NWSL, but for every club team that, is under US soccer, because it's not something that's strictly happening at the professional level. It's happening all over the place. And we really have to get to, the bottom of it to understand how these coaches are staying in these roles. How do we identify when coaches are crossing the line? What role do parents play in this? And so it's not just the NWSL, but it's also, US soccer is culpable in this as well. And so, they're really going to have to, stay with these promises that they're going to investigate and do it independently. Because, right, if US soccer is investigating themselves, what's going to happen? And I equate this honestly to what we saw happen in gymnastics with USA Gymnastics. And they still haven't done an independent investigation in that situation. So we still don't know what happened with that. We don't know who all was involved, who knew what, and who knew what when. And so if we're going to learn from things like that, we need to start taking those steps, or the league needs to take those steps to make sure that this doesn't happen and those people are not in the league anymore. So I think they're trying to figure out what's next in terms of a task force. There is an NWSL Players Association, and they have had some serious demands for the league. It sounds like as of the last update that all of those demands have been met as of, I think, last month. And so that did call for an independent investigation. It did call for investigations into, all of the coaches or understanding hiring practices and things like that. So there is some movement in the right direction, but whether or not that's going to rectify the situation, I don't know.
I guess one of my other questions was this situation to relate it to a team we adopted throughout the year, the Atlanta Dream, going to the WNBA, and I saw and a whole bunch of male NBA stars spoke out about that. What are the male soccer players saying about this situation? I guess I honestly wouldn't be able to tell you the biggest name in the MLS since I'm just focused on the Columbus Crew, but what are the big names in the MLS saying about this?
Honestly, I haven't heard anything from any of them, but it could be also that I'm in a little bit of a vacuum because I don't really follow a lot of MLS players, don't really pay that close of attention to the MLS, simply because the MLS game isn't that exciting to me. I mean, to be completely honest, I would rather watch European soccer. And to be perfectly honest, I know a lot more European players than I do even US players. Obviously support the US men's national team, been watching them quite a bit with World Cup qualifying, things like that. But as far as, seeing players actually speak out and talk about this, I haven't seen, any of them supporting them or reaching out or making statements. The last statement we saw from the men's national team was in solidarity with the women's national team about equal pay. But beyond that, I haven't really seen anything with respect to the NWSL.
Yeah, because I feel which is unfortunate because the big corporations, which sad but statistically true, they only start to try and promote change if one, they're losing money. But you said at the beginning of this that they're making record profit right now. So
I don't know about record profit, but they've had really good viewership numbers, and the NWSL championship, which was broadcasted on CBS, had 525,000 viewers, which is a 200% increase from last year's final. So there's people that want to watch, obviously, and there were 10,000 people at the stadium watching in person. I was one of them. And I mean, it was a really, really cool environment. And it's really cool to see people excited about the NWSL and excited about the players. And, the supporter sections and fans have come together to really rally behind the players and show their support despite the turmoil that's been just rampant over the last 10 months.
Yeah, because if they're making money, they would think it's not that big a deal. And the other thing is, like, if it's just terrible to say, but if one of the top male people spoke out about it and it caught more traction in the news and all of that, they might move a little bit quicker, just because in history's past, that's what we've seen move the needle, it sucks, but it is what it is at this point. But I think those things would be needed for them to actually really push on this, or they just, I don't know, or they just don't play. Because you brought up, like, if it's happening to the top athletes in the world in this profession, and then you go down, if you're a parent and you're seeing that and your daughter plays soccer, it's just like, well, if it's happening to people who play on the U.S. national team, I would think it could be happening to my daughter who's playing high school soccer or any of those things. Because it's like, if that's the culture that you're being brought up with, then the only way to make it, which would be terrible, but that's just things that need to change. Hell, if he wants redemption, that one guy who talked about Trinity Rodman, if he wants redemption, he can write a whole piece about it if he ever listens to any of these episodes, since he was so famous for those 30 seconds. But he can make his comeback fighting on this one. So
yeah, well, speaking of Trinity Rodman, people are still referring to her as Dennis Rodman's daughter, and now she is an NWSL champion.
A year ago, they still call her that?
Yeah, I saw a tweet just the other day that was like, Dennis Rodman's daughter, blah, blah, blah. And someone's like, she has a name. Her name's Trinity. And, it even came out. She said on Instagram, like, she doesn't have much of a relationship with her dad. He was at not the final. He might have been at the final. I don't know. But it was the game before the finals to the semis where she came out on Instagram and was like, it was great that my dad was there. But, just so you know, I don't have much of a relationship with him. We've had, a rocky relationship in general. And so, just trying to be very honest about it. And she's like, I had mixed emotions about him being there, was thrilled to see him, but also it's just a, touchy subject, for lack of a better term, just because they don't have much of a relationship. So, I think that adds an additional kind of layer to this, where you don't know these players on a personal level. So you don't know how referring to her simply as Dennis Rodman's daughter would affect her. Like, you don't know what that relationship is. And the fact that she even had to address that because people don't know, or people aren't respecting that she's her own person. And yes, she has a famous parent, but that shouldn't mean anything, or shouldn't, affect her ability to be a professional athlete. And so, I think it's even more disrespectful for somebody to refer to her that way, even now knowing that you shouldn't do it anyway. But this, I think, adds an additional layer and an additional reason not to do it.
Sure. It's not really even, this isn't an excuse. It's not like her name's hard. Name's Trinity.
Yeah.
It's not like it's 25 billion letters. It's Trinity Rodman. Not that hard. You brought up gymnastics, so I'd be remiss to ask you, since it was months ago, but what did you think of the whole twisties, Simone dropping out? I mean, because I know she was, when we did that whole thing with the Go to Goats, that was one of the people you were super hot that ESPN did not put on that thing. So I know she's your girl. What did you think about that situation back then, now, how things have changed? What did you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely heartbroken. I was devastated for her, but I think it was incredible to watch her make the best decision for herself. she doesn't have anything more to prove. She has a record number of medals, most of them gold. She's not hardly been beaten ever, and she wanted to do this for herself. And unfortunately, it just didn't work out the way she planned. But what I loved most about her was the fact that she was there still supporting her teammates. She made that decision because she couldn't trust herself and she wasn't going to take the chance of, competing, completely messing up and ruining her teammates' chances of getting any medal of any color. And so I think that's a huge gesture. I think it's a good understanding of yourself and what you can and can't do, knowing your limits. And so, yeah, I was incredibly heartbroken about the fact that she wasn't competing, but I have a whole lot more respect for her, even more than I did before, because she was able to make that decision. And, the number of people who were giving her so much shit on social media because of this, like, you
Some
don't
people still do.
Yeah, you calling her a quitter, saying that she just gave up. Like, are you a gymnast? Do you know what it's like to have the twisties? Do you go out every competition potentially where you could land on your neck and die? No, I don't think so. So I don't think you have any room to say or call her a quitter simply because she made a decision for herself. And what post Olympics I just love about her is that she has this carefree attitude now. She's very confident in herself and what she does. And it's just been, incredible to see her grow. She's only 24 years old. She's, done so much for being simply 24 years old. And again, she doesn't have anything to prove to anybody. And so I just love that she made that decision for herself, but also factored in, her teammates and knowing that she could potentially derail everything for them. And, as a result of this, we saw Suni, get the gold in the all around. Some of her other teammates were able to get a chance to compete that wouldn't have if Simone was in the competition. And so, I'm a firm believer of everything happens for a reason. And while, for her, it was probably really disappointing. What I loved most when she was able to do the beam final, she was like, I am going to love this bronze medal more than any of the other medals I've won in the past. And I think that's great. I think she recognizes how important this was for her, just from an individual perspective, and, F the haters for, lack of a better term, I guess. And then she went out and did a whole tour. She created this tour, which was incredible, by the way, and just said F you to the haters. And I love that about her. And she just, if you don't follow her on social media, it's so fun to see her, just being herself, being a regular 24-year-old, but also advocating for people. She has now become a huge advocate for mental health and has set this tone for people to realize that it's okay to take a mental health day, that it's okay to say, I just can't do this because I need some time to myself. And so, yeah, just have mad respect for her as an athlete, as a person. Yeah, I can't say enough good things about her.
Yeah. So when it first happened, first initially, even before they even got to the Olympics, the pre-qualifier things, you could have seen that she was off if you watched the pre stuff. So I was just like, this might be the year she actually loses. So then when she withdrew, I thought it was COVID because, still in the pandemic, things like that. And then when she explained the reason why, I understood it, but I felt bad because I was just like, this, because she's so good and she's the greatest of all time and one of the greatest athletes of all time. It's like, for like her, potentially her career to end like that before I knew she was going to compete one more time on the beam that she did, I was just like, oh, that sucks. But then I was just like, oh, I'm sad for her but she did what she had to do. Then when you go through the dark web of the Twitter threads and see everyone calling her a quitter and this and that, and then I just didn't like some of the things they were trying to equal it as, like, oh, you don't see U.S. military people quitting if they have like, I was like, okay, those are two completely different things. No one is trying to say that gymnastics is as important as the military, but everyone's mental health is important. So I just didn't like that. And then seeing people call her a quitter, I was just like, well, I mean, she's technically done more for the country than like most of the people on Twitter, because she's there representing the country, putting her body on the line, like you said. So I just didn't get the quitter part. And I still don't get it from today, because if you type in Simone on YouTube or whatever, you'll see things like she quit and why, she's un-American and why, if she knew she had these things, why'd she even show up, this, that. So that argument is just a bad argument for the people who think she quit. From a sports side, I did not. I'm not going to say I liked her not being able to compete, but I like seeing what gymnastics was going to be without her, because as all goats are, they are not going to do this forever. So we got to see everyone else do it. And also, I honestly think that she inspired the younger generation, like you just said, with like the mental health day and all of that, and like taking time for your mental health. And also seeing Suni Lee and the others rise up, like, hey, if the GOAT says it's okay to, like, if I can't do this, but also seeing that this gymnastic team is so strong that they can win without her, that would motivate me if I was a women gymnast to, like, hey, I want to make this team, because we're not just Simone, we are the U.S. women gymnastics national team. But yeah, what you said about the haters and all that, it was just unnecessary. I just didn't think it'd be that hot topic for 2-3 weeks at the time. Like, I didn't think it'd be that big a deal. Okay, she said she wasn't feeling it, twisties, all right, move on. But the fact that millions of people in her own country were calling her a traitor to the nation was just baffling. Which I forgot who was it, Rafael Nadal, who said something about, no, Djokovic.
Yep,
It was Djokovic. Yeah, he said something about Simone, like, oh, you can't do that, blah, 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 who he was number one tennis player in the world. But then, like, literally, 2-3 weeks later, he had a mental breakdown, and then it wasn't that big of a story.
I was going to bring that up. So it actually was at the Olympics. So and some people say that this quote was previous, so it might have been taken out of context. I don't really know, but basically said pressure is a privilege and she needs to figure out how to, compete under pressure, which, mind you, important to note that she was a victim in the sexual abuse scandal, and she is the only gymnast still competing from that. So you can imagine that there's a lot of trauma associated with that, going back to the Olympics, knowing that this had happened to you during the Olympics or, during that time frame. So it's understandable that she had, these issues, or, mentally she wasn't prepared, because how do you deal with trauma? How do you know that that's, going to creep into your mind? Like, you just don't know. And I think it's unfair for people to, discount her trauma and that she should be over it by now. You don't get over something like that. And so that's one thing. But yeah, and so Novak basically was like, pressure is a privilege, blah, blah, blah. And then at the Olympic Games, he did not have a very good singles showing.
He did not.
But was competing in doubles and was supposed to compete in the bronze medal match. But basically was like, I'm not doing it. Claimed that he was injured, whatever else. Didn't even try to play in the bronze medal match. Didn't even give his mixed doubles partner a chance, who has never won a medal at the Olympic Games, to compete. And nobody even batted an eye when that happened. So tell me, who is the quitter in that situation? He didn't even try. Simone at least went out there, tried, and realized that there were limits to what she could do and how that was going to affect her team. And potentially, she could have killed herself out there. Like, it wasn't worth it. But nobody, or very few people, were talking about the Novak situation. And it's really frustrating when we look at how athletes are, viewed or, scrutinized just because of who they are, or not being scrutinized because of who they are. So yeah, not a great look from him, but not a lot of conversation around what he did, which is really frustrating.
Yeah. And I also think with the team, with Simone being supportive of her with the twisties and all that, I think also from a normal people's perspective, I hope a lot of like employers and all of that stuff took example of that, because of the highest sports team in the land representing the United States understands that their top employee athlete can't do it. And it's like, it's okay. We've got your back, yada, yada, yada. Normal society and employers should take that into account, because and I get where some people were on Twitter saying, well, my job wouldn't allow me to do that, which is probably true because they haven't taken mental health serious. And that's a whole other topic for a whole other day, because mental health's not even on most people's insurance plans for like work. But they should take note. If the USA national gymnastics team is allowing the greatest of all time, like, okay, you're cool, then your freaking job at like, I don't want to throw any, like Best Buy or AEP should allow you to do the same as well.
Yeah, and USA Gymnastics just put way too much on Simone's shoulders.
Yeah.
You know, they basically were like, we've got Simone Biles, and that's really all that matters. And, you know, that's a lot of pressure for one person to handle, even somebody like Simone Biles. So, you know, it's important to recognize that your words matter, and what you say and what you do matters, and that can create, you know, problems for people. And obviously USA Gymnastics just being their own dumpster fire is a whole different conversation that we could talk about for hours. But, you know.
What else? What else has been keeping your eyes up at night about like, man, this needs to change for women in sports? Or honestly, do you feel like last year, this month, but last year, I think in December, that one lady who, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting your name, but you had she had the great tweet about being a girl dad and all of that. So now a year later, about to go into 2022, have you felt like, when I now talking the past 40 minutes, it might not be that much improvements, but have you felt like there have been improvements like from last year to this year as we're going into 2022? And what would you want to see in 2022? Like, how are you feeling about just overall?
Well, I think one thing we should talk about is the NCAA expanding the women's basketball tournament to 68 teams, and also them being able to use March Madness branding, which why they weren't able to prior to that is beyond me. So I think that's a step in the right direction. It's a small gesture. It's the absolute bare minimum that should happen, but I guess we'll take it, and that's a problem. The fact that I just said that, like, we'll take it because we should be expecting more. Those women in those collegiate programs should be expecting more, should be granted more for what they do. And so, you know, for me to be like, yeah, this is great. It's the bare minimum. It's what should have been happening for the last decade, probably, or whenever they expanded the men's tournament, they should have expanded the women's tournament as well. So it's a step in the right direction. What they can do more than that, you know, obviously making sure that we don't have another debacle like we did last March.
Oh, man, that was some times.
Yeah, with the weight room, all of that stuff, making sure that, you know, conference commissioners, the teams, the coaches are doing their due diligence in terms of negotiating or putting that together so that something like that doesn't happen again. But so that's a good thing. That's a positive. You know, I think there's always going to be room for improvement. You know, we're starting to see more and more women's games on TV, which is massive. But like I said, you can always do more. And, you know, there's just been a lot of stuff over, you know, the last year, and we're seeing that the numbers are there. We're seeing that viewership numbers are skyrocketing for women's sports. So why are you not listening to those? Why are you not looking at the data and saying, okay, there's definitely a market for this? how do we, tap into that market and make sure that people know about it? How do we market it appropriately? All of those things. And you're going to get those eyes on the game. Like, do you really need to show a Thursday night game between, I don't even know, some low-level conference? Probably not. There's probably a women's basketball game or a volleyball match or something that you can show that people are interested in. For example, Louisville right now, number 1 team in the country, undefeated. We're going to knock on wood because they play tomorrow. But they have been so fun to watch. But if you don't have the ACC network, you can't watch
them.
Yeah. So, like, how do we make it more accessible for people? So, yeah, you can say, well, they're on TV, but only a certain number of people can watch that, or certain people can watch that. So how do we make women's sports more accessible? And I think that's something that, networks are going to have to continually improve upon, because we know men's sports are accessible. If I went and turned the TV on right now, it's Tuesday, so there's probably a football game on.
College football playoff. You turn into that, how they make the selection, the final, like the 4 into a reality TV show.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, you can do things like that with the women's, any sport, you can figure it out. So that is something that's always going to need improvement. And I think with basketball in particular, we're starting to see more and more women's games. There was a massive matchup on yesterday between the number 1. Yeah.
UConn and South Carolina.
Yeah. And so, it was on at noon yesterday. So how many people are going to be able to watch a noon game? That's,
on a Tuesday.
Yeah, it's on a Tuesday. They were in the Bahamas? So time difference, you get it. Like, there's only so much you can do. But if that was an 8:00 game, would it have been on ABC or ESPN? Who knows? You would hope so. But, there's always something that could bump them from being on, your nationally televised station. So, whatever the networks can do to get people's eyes on them is huge. The other thing is, we look at merchandise. We look at different leagues, different organizations selling merchandise, and they don't do a good job of it. Like, I have seen people who have wanted, like, the WNBA hoodies, have wanted NWSL jerseys, and they just can't figure out how to have enough stock. So if you're selling out constantly, or things are constantly on back order, wouldn't that, in the mind of somebody like Nike or Adidas, tell you that you need more inventory? That people are clearly interested in buying this stuff, but they can't get their hands on it, or it's taking, months and months and months to get to people because you just don't have the stock, or you don't have the infrastructure to make it happen like you do with men's apparel or with, merchandise for men's teams. Like, why is that so hard to figure out? So that's kind of my soapbox right now. But, it's one of those things that you have a successful model in place. How do you take that model and formulate it to women's sports and make sure that it works for them? Obviously, men's sports, women's sports, very different products, very different fans, generally speaking. So you have to figure out, and this is, what I talk to my marketing students about all the time. You have to understand your consumer. Who is it? What do they want? What are their needs? And then how do you morph your strategy to match those? And I just don't know why that's so hard for execs to figure out when it comes to women's sports. It shouldn't be that hard. You have a model. How do you adapt that model for it to work for women's sports? So definitely some improvement there, but certainly we've made some strides. But Sabrina Ionescu the other day tweeted something about, I really wish I could go on ESPN's website and see, highlights from the WNBA or women's college basketball.
We talked about that last year. You can't even put them on your ticker.
Yeah, unless there's something bad happening. And that happened when all this stuff with NWSL happened. It's like the only time people will talk about women's soccer is when there's something bad happening. Why can't you talk about it all the time? From a journalistic perspective, you want to talk about things that are happening, but do it when it's positive and when it's negative, not just when it's negative. Don't just pick up the story because, people are going to click on it because it's bad or it's not good press. Like, I'm sure ESPN has enough soccer writers that could, report on the NWSL regularly or find freelance writers who will do that. So it's not that hard, but it's about how much work and time and effort you're willing to put in to make it happen.
I agree. It's funny how you brought up number one versus number two and how that was on 12 o'clock in the afternoon. But number one and number two in the men's, Gonzaga and UCLA, they're playing tonight. And it's 10 o'clock, so Western time, like prime time, 8 o'clock. They're both on the West, so I understand that. But I think my thing is that if ESPN cares, they will make it happen. Like ESPN never talked about hockey for like the past 12 years, unless like Sidney Crosby did something. But now since ESPN has signed the deal with the NHL, now all of a sudden they're pro hockey, everything like that. Stephen A. freaking Smith is talking about hockey. The dude's never talked about hockey in his 20 plus years of like sport journalism. But now, since ESPN cares about hockey, everyone cares about hockey. So that's all they have to do, really. It's like, hey, we're going to really emphasize women's college basketball. Then everyone's going to talk about women's college basketball. Still to this day, it's hard, obviously, with like work and all that stuff. But if I'm scrolling through YouTube, looking at ESPN or like Fox Sports and seeing like clips of their debate shows, still have not seen one person even debate like, oh, we just had number one versus number two. The stuff they do with like men's sports all the time. Like, does this team are they posed to make a run in the tournament because they just beat number two? None of that. So, yeah. Or they never do the shows like on First Take or Get Up or Undisputed. Like, who do you think's going to make it to the Final Four in women's college basketball? Well, they have like 60 different of those for the guys, like every couple of weeks. So there's your representation right there for folks. If you're not, it's pretty easy to see. Just look at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make a good point about the NHL. Like, it's that easy. If you have a TV rights deal, then you have a reason to market. You should be marketing them anyway. But if there's money involved and you're putting forth the effort and the time and the money to have that rights or have those rights, then yeah, obviously you're going to put forth the effort to make sure that people are watching it. And so why don't we do that for women's sports? I don't have an answer, unfortunately, but it is our reality. And it's still, people are shocked when I tell them that on average, women receive 4% of all media coverage. Like, that number has probably grown in the last couple of years, but it's still way below where it should be, especially given how interested people are in women's sports. And that's like people's biggest thing. They're like, nobody cares about women's sports. Well, obviously that's not true based on the viewership numbers that we've seen, that when games are on CBS or ABC, people are watching them, and not just watching them, but are watching them in record numbers. Like, that should be enough to convince you that you need to put more effort into making that happen. And in fact, I actually just saw that for the first time ever, ABC is going to be doing some gymnastics meets, or the collegiate final, the NCAA final, will be on ABC, which is massive. And so again, step in the right direction. And I think maybe the Olympics definitely helped this, because we know that people are really only fans of gymnastics every 4 years. But there is such a huge fandom for collegiate gymnastics. And in particular, we're starting to see, because of NIL, so name, image, likeness, that those athletes who go to the Olympics don't have to choose to go pro. They can still go to college because they can still reap the benefits of being an Olympian. So you're going to see Jade Carey, you're going to see Suni Lee, you're going to see Grace. They're all going to be collegiate gymnasts this year. And so people are going to watch that. And I think it's really cool that ESPN has, made ABC have some coverage, and as well as some of their other ESPN, ESPNU, ESPN2 will have coverage of meets as well. So that's massive.
If they want to, they'll make it happen. That's how any That's how any big exec, especially sports, if they care, it'll be done. Like it'll be brought to the front of the line, done in 2 seconds. That's it. It's all it takes from the big execs. Chelsea, anything else before we closing remarks, anything?
I don't think so. It's just been really good to be back. I know it's been a while, but love talking to you and everybody else.
All right. So first closing thing, obviously, thank you, Dr. Chelsea Police, for being back. Just like you just said, it's been a while. So I know everyone, all the other people, the contributors to the L7C, your fans are all going to be excited to hear this and see that you are back. Make sure, I can't wait as we go into the new year, which means we will be going into March Madness. And I know you will definitely be keeping an eye on the tweets. And you would think that the NCAA wouldn't mess it up 2 years in a row, but it is the NCAA. So if they fix that, it'll be something else with travel or something. So definitely keep an eye on that. But no, with that being said, it's just great to have you back. Great to have the voice for women's sports on. And yeah, with that being said, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. By the time you listen to this, it will be close to Thanksgiving or Thanksgiving Day or after Thanksgiving. And with that being said, this is the L7C podcast signing out. Thank you for listening to this episode of the L7C podcast. Be sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to the channel. Follow us on all social media platforms, and we'll be talking to you guys soon. Take care.